Alive for only 37 prolific and passionate years, Raphael blazed a comet's trail of painting throughout the apex of the Italian High Renaissance. His true lust for life translated onto the canvas, where his skill in presenting the Renaissance humanist era's ideals of beauty was breathtakingly new. He is, alongside Leonardo da Vinci and Michelangelo, considered an equal part of the holy trinity of master artists of his time. Raffaello Sanzio da Urbino was born on April 6, 1483, to Giovanni Santi di Pietro and Magia di Battista di Nicola Ciarla, who came from wealthy merchant families from Urbino and Colbordolo in the Marche region. At the time, Urbino was a flourishing cultural center, and Raphael's father worked as a painter for Federigo da Montefeltro, the Duke of Urbino, where he was the head of a well-known studio. Raphael was the only child of 3 to survive infancy. His mother died in 1491 when Raphael was 9 years old, and his father remarried to Bernardina, the daughter of a goldsmith, the following year. His father provided Raphael's early training as a painter. Evidence of this early brilliance, even before he was officially recognized as a master, can be seen in the resurrection of Christ, also known as the Kinnaird Resurrection, named after its early owner, Lord Kinnaird. Completed between 1499 and 1502, it is one of Raphael's earliest extant works and holds a unique status as the only painting by the artist conserved in the Southern Hemisphere, currently housed in the São Paulo Museum of Art. Technically, the painting reveals Raphael's early departure from the rigid traditions of his time. The composition is governed by a complex, ideal geometry that interlinks every element, from the startled soldiers to the hovering angels, into a unique choreography. Instead of a static religious scene, Raphael creates an animated rhythm, demonstrating his burgeoning knowledge of the contemporary Florentine style. Symbolically, this spatial orchestration shows his innate ability to transform a divine event into a perfectly balanced theatrical spectacle, a hallmark of the divine spark that would later define his greatest masterpieces. According to his biographer Giorgio Vasari in his influential book, Lives of the Most Excellent Painters, Sculptors, and Architects, 1550, his father also arranged for Raphael to be placed in the studio of Italian Renaissance painter Pietro Perugino when he was 8 years old. While we don't know with any certainty when this apprenticeship began, we do know he was working as an assistant in Perugino's studio the year of his father's death in 1494. During these formative years in Perugino's studio, Raphael began to develop a signature sense of grace that moved beyond the mere imitation of his master. His ability to idealize the human form is perfectly captured in his early devotional works. One of the most delicate examples from this period is Saint Sebastian, 1502, now housed in the Accademia Carrara of Bergamo. Historically, this painting depicts the 3rd century martyr who was killed during Emperor Diocletian's persecution. While traditional art often portrays Sebastian in a grisly manner, tied to a post and riddled with arrows, Raphael's artistic approach is remarkably different. He chooses to ignore the violence of the execution, instead depicting the saint cloaked in an ornate red robe with flawless, pure skin, a luminous quality that would later become a hallmark of his famous Madonnas. Technically, the aesthetic execution reveals Raphael's dexterous and fine handling of paint, particularly in the detailed, gently curling hair of the saint. Symbolically, the martyr's death is only hinted at by a single arrow held delicately in his right hand. Raphael's genius for humanizing the divine is evident here. The saint holds the arrow with the grace of a musician holding a violin bow, transforming a symbol of torture into an object of elegance. This early work provides a glimpse into Raphael's personality as an artist. A man who sought to find harmony and beauty even in the most tragic of subjects, establishing the Neoplatonic ideals of perfection that would define his second life of fame. Upon Giovanni's death, Raphael inherited his father's studio, and Giovanni's brother was appointed Raphael's legal guardian. His uncle took over the management of the studio, with Raphael continuing to work in his father's workshop. Although Raphael went on to receive training in Urbino from a court painter named Timoteo Viti, it was Perugino who is recognized as Raphael's first significant artistic influence. When he was only 17 years old, his profound talent as a painter, coupled with the completion of his apprenticeship, gained him recognition as a true master. Such was his ability at the time that it was impossible to distinguish between the hand of Perugino or Raphael, both in style and technique. A definitive example of this stylistic mimicry is the Mond Crucifixion, 1502 to 1503, painted for the church of San Domenico in Città di Castello. This work, also known as the Crocifissione Gavari, serves as a profound testament to Raphael's early mastery under the Umbrian master Pietro Perugino. While Vasari claimed Raphael entered Perugino's workshop at the age of 8, most modern historians agree he began working as a highly skilled assistant around 1500. During this formative period, the influence of his mentor was so absolute that Vasari famously remarked it was impossible to distinguish between their hands. This technical mimicry is evident in the thick application of oil varnish in the shadows and garments, contrasted with the delicate, thin layers of paint used for the flesh, a method that often led to characteristic cracking over time due to an excess of resin. In this altarpiece for the church of San Domenico, Raphael depicts Jesus on the cross in a remarkably serene aspect, transcending the physical agony of death with a sense of divine peace. The composition is a masterclass in Umbrian symmetry. Two ethereal angels float on either side, catching Christ's blood in chalices with a rhythmic grace that mirrors his teacher's style. Beneath the cross, the figures of Mary Magdalene, John the Evangelist, Mary, and Saint Jerome are arranged with a balanced poise that reinforces the scene's spiritual gravity. Yet, even within this borrowed style, Raphael began to assert his own identity. At the foot of the cross, he placed the bold inscription, Raphael VRBN, As P. Inxit, proudly claiming his origin and authorship in silver letters. This act of branding reveals the confident personality of a young artist who, though officially recognized as a master by 1501, was already preparing to surpass the traditions that raised him. Now housed in London's National Gallery after being bequeathed by Ludwig Mond, the painting stands as the perfect record of the moment before Raphael's divine spark would ignite a revolution in the art of the High Renaissance. It was in 1500 that Raphael received his first commission, an altarpiece dedicated to Saint Nicholas of Tolentino. The altarpiece was for Andrea Baronci's chapel in the church of Saint Agostino in Città di Castello, a town not far from Urbino. Historically, this moment marks a vital milestone. Despite his youth, the legal contracts explicitly identified the teenager as the master, declaring his professional independence. His artistic approach for this altarpiece utilized the graceful foundation of the Umbrian school to balance spiritual gravity with aesthetic elegance. Even in its fragmented state, the aesthetic execution reflects the Renaissance humanist ideal of divine beauty made manifest through human skill, displaying a clarity of light that would become his signature. Symbolically, the painting honored a saint known for his triumph over the devil, providing the Baronci family with a powerful icon of faith, the human face of power. Within this project lies in Raphael's own extraordinary social intelligence, allowing him to navigate high-stakes commissions and manage older collaborators with ease at just 17. This first masterpiece's legacy was the catalyst for his meteoric rise, proving that his journey was a rapid ascent to the very pinnacle of Western art. Although a joint commission with Evangelista da Pian di Mileto, a friend and contemporary of his father, Raphael was recorded as the master. Sadly, the altarpiece was damaged during an earthquake in 1789, and today only fragments remain, dispersed in various collections around the world. Important commissions followed, including the coronation of the Virgin, 1502, for the altar of the Oddi family chapel in the church of San Francesco al Prato in Perugia. In 1502, Raphael was commissioned by Maddalena degli Oddi to paint the coronation of the Virgin for the family's funerary chapel in the church of San Francesco al Prato in Perugia. This was a prestigious assignment for a 19-year-old, as the Oddi family was one of the most influential and powerful factions in the city. Historically, this commission solidified Raphael's reputation not just as a local talent, but as a premier artist capable of handling the high-stakes political and religious demands of the Umbrian elite during a period of intense social competition. His artistic approach during this period remained deeply indebted to the serene, rhythmic style of his master, Pietro Perugino. Raphael adopted the traditional two-tiered compositional structure common in Umbrian altarpieces, where the celestial and terrestrial spheres are clearly separated. However, even within this established framework, Raphael began to inject a new sense of spatial clarity and psychological presence. He subtly moved away from Perugino's more repetitive and static figure types to explore a more dynamic and individualized interaction between the characters, signaling his evolution from a dedicated student to an innovator. The aesthetic execution of the Oddi altarpiece is a masterclass in balance and harmony. The upper register depicts a radiant heaven where Christ crowns the Virgin amidst a choir of music-making angels, while the lower register shows the apostles gathered around an empty tomb. The tomb is miraculously filled with white lilies and roses, symbolizing the Virgin's purity and her bodily assumption. Raphael's use of soft, luminous colors, and his emerging ability to create a sense of three-dimensional depth through the diagonal placement of the sarcophagus demonstrate a technical maturity that far exceeded his years, providing a window into the divine spark that his biographer Vasari so often praised. Symbolically, the painting represents the ultimate exaltation of Mary, serving as a visual testament to the hope of resurrection and divine intercession. The contrast between the grounded, earthly wonder of the apostles and the ethereal rhythmic grace of the coronation above reinforces the Renaissance concept of a structured, hierarchical universe. For the Oddi family, this imagery was a powerful statement of their own piety and their desire for a lasting spiritual legacy, ensuring their name would be associated with the highest standards of beauty and devotion. The human face of power in this work is reflected in Raphael's sophisticated handling of his patron's expectations and his ability to humanize the divine. His interaction with the Oddi family showcased an artist who possessed the social grace and courtly intelligence necessary to navigate the complex social hierarchies of Perugia. By giving the apostles distinct, individualized expressions ranging from quiet contemplation to profound awe, Raphael began to replace the generic holy figure with a more human, relatable presence. This ability to capture the nuance of human emotion became a hallmark of his personality and his enduring appeal to the ruling classes. Today, the coronation of the Virgin stands as a cornerstone of Raphael's early legacy, housed within the Vatican museums. Critically, it is regarded as the definitive masterpiece of his Perugian years, representing the culmination of his Umbrian training before his transformative move to Florence. It serves as the perfect bridge in his career, showcasing the technical perfection he reached under Perugino's influence while hinting at the monumental narrative power and technical achievement he would later use to define the pinnacle of the High Renaissance. He also created his most important piece of this time, The Marriage of the Virgin in 1504, which was inspired by Perugino's painting Christ Delivering the Keys to St. Peter, 1482. Also known as Lo Sposalizio, this grand oil painting was completed for the Franciscan Church of San Francesco, Città di Castello, and depicts the marriage ceremony between Mary and Joseph. During the early 1500s, patrons in Città di Castello sent 3 commissions to Raphael's master Pietro Perugino, which in his master's absence were completed by Raphael, including the Marriage of the Virgin, now believed to be his last work as an apprentice. Evidently inspired by Perugino's Marriage of the Virgin, Raphael completed his interpretation of the subject in 1504. Several historians have disputed that Perugino's painting preceded Raphael's, and some have suggested the painting was not Perugino's at all, but instead produced after Raphael's by one of Perugino's followers, though a piece of 16th century documentary evidence supports the conclusion that Perugino had begun working on the painting in 1499. The differences between Raphael and Perugino's interpretations of the same subject were famously compared by the art biographer Giorgio Vasari, who wrote that it may be distinctly seen the progress of excellence of Raphael's style, which becomes much more subtle and refined and surpasses the manner of Pietro. In this work, he continued, there is a temple drawn in perspective with such evident care that it is marvelous to behold the difficulty of the problems which he has there set himself to solve. The painting completed by Raphael was commissioned by Filippo degli Albezzini to hang in a church dedicated to St. Francis, where it remained until General Giuseppe Lecci led forces to Città di Castello to liberate it from Austrian occupation, when the painting was gifted to the general. Lecci sold it in 1801 to Giacomo Sanazzaro, who himself sold it in 1804 to the Ospedale Maggiore in Milan. By whatever means it arrived there and was in the possession of the hospital for a short time, before the hospital sold it to the Italian state for 53,000 francs. It has since then been displayed in Milan's Pinacoteca di Brera, in spite of an 1859 proposal to donate the image to France after that country's army had entered Milan. Through these various relocations, the painting was damaged. The panel had several cracks in the upper half, while there was rippling and bowing throughout. Italian artist Giuseppe Molteni was employed to repair the painting in November 1857, and he chose to preserve the panel rather than transfer it to canvas, spending months flattening the panel and hydrating it to overcome the damage of desiccation. This decision on the part of Molteni has permitted 20th century art historians to use infrared reflectography to study the underdrawing beneath the painted surface. Molteni also undertook to clean the surface of the painting, which had been subjected to restoration before. He did not clean aggressively as he wanted to be sure that elements of the original painting were preserved. This tiny, jewel-like panel, often referred to by its subtitle, The Dream of Scipio, marks a fascinating moment in Raphael's early career, where his art became a vehicle for complex philosophical thought. Completed around 1505 and now housed in London's National Gallery, it is believed to have formed a diptych with the Three Graces panel, both measuring only 17 centimeters square. The painting's aesthetic execution is characterized by a dreamlike clarity, depicting a sleeping knight, possibly the Roman general Scipio Africanus positioned between two female figures. Unlike traditional depictions of a struggle between vice and virtue, Raphael presents a more harmonious artistic approach. Rather than contestants, these figures represent the balanced attributes of a perfect Renaissance nobleman. On the left, a figure in sober attire offers a book and a sword, symbolizing the life of the scholar and the soldier. On the right, a figure in looser robes presents a flower, representing the life of the lover and the pursuit of beauty. This allegory, likely inspired by the Latin epic poem Punica by Silius Italicus, reveals the human face of power through the lens of moral duty. It suggests that a true prince or knight must not choose one path over the other, but must master all three: learning, bravery, and love, to achieve a state of spiritual and social perfection. This small masterpiece perfectly encapsulates Raphael's own personality. A man who possessed the courtly intelligence to navigate the elite circles of the Renaissance while maintaining a profound dedication to the harmony of the human soul. In 1504, Raphael moved to Siena, invited by the painter Perugino to prepare drawings for the frescoes in the Libreria Piccolomini. From there, he went on to Florence, the thriving center of the Italian Renaissance, where he stayed for the next 4 years. It was during this time that he would meet his two prime rivals, Leonardo da Vinci and Michelangelo. The three would become known as the primary trio of great masters from that period, although Raphael was remarkably younger. Raphael led a nomadic life in the early 1500s, working in various centers in northern Italy, though he spent a good deal of time in Florence from about 1504. He received a letter of recommendation dated October 1504 from the mother of the next Duke of Urbino, recommending the artist to the Gonfaloniere of Florence. The bearer of this will be found to be Raphael, painter of Urbino, who, being greatly gifted in his profession, has determined to spend some time in Florence to study. And because his father was most worthy, and I was very attached to him, and the son is a sensible and well-mannered young man, on both accounts, I bear him great love. Raphael's good looks and courtly manners rapidly made him popular at the Florentine court. The Madonna del Granduca is believed to have been painted in 1505, shortly after Raphael's arrival in Florence. The influence of Leonardo da Vinci, whose works the young artist first encountered there, can be seen in the use of sfumato in this work. This technique is one of the 4 canonical painting modes of the Renaissance, the other 3 being cangiante, chiaroscuro, and unione. Sfumato comes from the Italian sfumare, to tone down or to evaporate like smoke. Leonardo was the most prominent practitioner of sfumato, and his Mona Lisa famously demonstrates the technique, with the blurred outlines of the equivocal smile. Leonardo described sfumato as rendering a subject without lines or borders, in the manner of smoke or beyond the focus plane. Raphael delicately depicts the gradual shade and light on the Virgin and Christ's faces, achieving fine contours and producing soft, imperceptible transitions between colors and tones. The plain black background adds to the impression created, working as a foil to the beauty of the depiction of the subjects. This aesthetic execution reveals Raphael's extraordinary personality as an artistic sponge. While he adopted Leonardo's atmospheric smoke-like shadows, he intentionally chose to omit the master's complex, often distracting landscapes in favor of a stark, dark void. This deliberate choice highlights the human face of power through pure simplicity. By stripping away the background, Raphael forces the viewer to confront the divine intimacy and human tenderness of the mother and child directly. It was this ability to synthesize the radical techniques of his rivals with his own sense of clarity and sensible grace that allowed him to transform the traditional Madonna into a timeless icon of Neoplatonic beauty, marking the true beginning of his ascent to becoming a mortal god in the eyes of the Florentine elite. This other famous Madonna from Raphael's Florentine period was also completed in circa 1506. Once again, we are presented with an idyllic image of Mary with Saint John the Baptist and the Christ child in a peaceful green meadow. The pyramid structure is reprised, as the three figures are linked by looks and touching hands. The Virgin Mary is represented wearing a gold-bordered blue mantle set against a red dress, with her right leg lying along a diagonal plane. As before, the blue of her clothing symbolizes the church and the red color Christ's death and sacrifice. With eyes fixed on her son, Mary's head is turned to the left and slightly inclined, while in her hands she holds up Christ, as he leans forward unsteadily to touch the miniature cross gripped by John. The poppy refers to Christ's passion, death, and resurrection. The perfect beauty, softly lit from the left, has won the painting great acclaim over the centuries for its ineffable grace and fine handling. The canvas is now housed in the Kunsthistorisches Museum in Vienna. This aesthetic execution stands as a definitive example of the Renaissance ideal of beauty, where Raphael achieves a state of divine harmony that feels both supernatural and deeply human. By utilizing the pyramidal structure, he creates a sense of geometric stability that grounds the spiritual narrative in physical reality. The human face of power here is not found in grand political gestures, but in Raphael's absolute control over emotion and form. He manages to foreshadow the tragedy of the cross through the interaction with the poppy and the miniature cross. Yet he maintains an atmosphere of ineffable grace. This ability to balance profound sorrow with serene beauty allowed Raphael to surpass the more turbulent styles of his rivals, offering the Florentine public a vision of the world that was perfectly ordered, luminous, and eternally peaceful. As his mastery of Florentine techniques deepened, Raphael began to explore more complex emotional and structural harmonies. Housed in Florence's Uffizi Gallery, the Madonna del Cardellino dates from circa 1505 and is one of Raphael's most famous Madonnas from his Florentine period, created before his move to Rome. Like the Madonna of the Meadow and La Belle Jardinière, Madonna of the Goldfinch is clothed in red, referring to Christ's eventual passion, and the figures are grouped in a pyramidal structure, guiding the viewer's eye to Mary at the apex of the triangular structure. The paintings also share a natural background, with a connection to the church through the representation of the color blue and symbols of books and crosses. In Madonna of the Goldfinch, Raphael arranges Mary, Christ, and the young John the Baptist to fit into a geometrical design. Though the positions of the three bodies are natural, together they form an almost regular triangle. The Madonna is portrayed as young and beautiful, as with Raphael's various other Madonna paintings. Christ and John are depicted as little more than babies, as John holds a goldfinch in his hand, while Christ reaches out to touch the bird. The goldfinch represents Christ's crucifixion, due to a legend that its red spot was born at the time of the crucifixion. According to the legend, the bird flew down over the head of Christ and was taking a thorn from his crown, when it was splashed with the drop of his blood. The book in Mary's hand reads, Sedes Sapientiae, or the Throne of Wisdom. This term is usually applied to images in which Mary is seated upon a throne, with Jesus on her lap. But in this case, the inscription implies that the rock on which Mary is sitting is her natural throne. The painting was a wedding gift from Raphael to his friend Lorenzo Nasi. On November 17, 1548, Nasi's house was destroyed by an earthquake and the painting broke into 17 pieces. It was immediately taken away to be repaired and was hastily put back together, though the seams remain quite visible. In 2002, George Bonsanti of the Precious Stones organization gave the task of restoration to Patrizia Ritano. During the 6-year process that followed, her team worked to remove the years of grime that had degraded the painting's color, working to repair the damage done by the earthquake long ago. Before beginning the project, they studied the work as closely as possible, utilizing resources such as X-rays, CAT scans, reflective infrared photography, and even lasers. Ritano closely studied the previous quick-fix layers that had been applied and removed them until the original layers by Raphael were reached. The restoration was completed in 2008 and the painting was put on display in the Uffizi. This masterpiece perfectly illustrates the human face of power in Raphael's social and artistic life. By creating such a profound work as a personal wedding gift, he utilized his talent to cement his status among the merchant elite, showing a warmth of personality that his rivals often lacked. The aesthetic execution of the pyramidal structure, a lesson learned from Leonardo, is handled here with a unique lightness. the figures do not feel heavy or distant, but instead radiate a reachable human tenderness. Symbolically, by placing the omen of the Passion, the goldfinch, in the hands of innocent children, Raphael bridges the gap between divine destiny and human emotion. It is this balance of monumental stability and delicate feeling that showcases his rapid evolution toward the divine spark that would soon capture the attention of the Pope in Rome. In 1507, during the final year of his transformative stay in Florence, Raphael painted La Belle Jardinière, the beautiful gardener. Historically, this work represents the peak of his Florentine period, serving as a sophisticated synthesis of everything he had learned from the city's masters. By this time, Raphael had moved beyond being a mere prodigy of the Umbrian school and had established himself as a formidable rival to the greats, creating a version of the Madonna that was both intellectually rigorous and aesthetically accessible. His artistic approach for this masterpiece was profoundly influenced by Leonardo da Vinci. Raphael adopted Leonardo's structural innovations, most notably the stable triangular pyramid composition. However, unlike Leonardo's often mysterious and distant figures, Raphael's approach was warmer and more human. He integrated Leonardo's sfumato, smoky blurring of edges, and chiaroscuro, contrast of light and dark, but used them to enhance the clarity and naturalism of the figures, rather than to shroud them in enigma. The aesthetic execution of La Belle Jardinière is a testament to Raphael's growing technical genius. The Virgin Mary is seated in a serene landscape, with the Christ child and a young Saint John the Baptist at her feet. Raphael's mastery is evident in the luminous skin tones and the soft, realistic textures of the flowing drapery. The gardener moniker comes from the lush, detailed flora in the foreground, showing a level of botanical realism that reflects the Renaissance obsession with observing the natural world. The harmony between the figures and the soft Umbrian-style landscape in the background creates a sense of perfect, divine equilibrium. Symbolically, the painting is a celebration of the Madonna of Humility. By placing the Virgin in a simple meadow rather than on a throne, Raphael emphasizes her role as a nurturing mother. The intimate gaze between Mary and the Christ child symbolizes the profound bond of divine love, while the presence of the young Saint John, who holds a cross, serves as a subtle, poignant reminder of the future passion. The beauty of the setting is a symbolic earthly paradise, where the divine presence brings order and peace to the natural landscape. The human face of power in this work lies in Raphael's ability to democratize beauty. His personality was one of immense social intelligence. He understood that the wealthy merchants of Florence desired art that was grand yet relatable. In La Belle Jardinière, he presents a humanized holiness. Mary is not a distant icon, but a beautiful, graceful woman whose power is expressed through maternal tenderness. This ability to capture the vibration of life, made his work highly sought after by patrons who wanted art that reflected the humanist belief that man, and by extension, the divine in human form, was the measure of all things. Critically, La Belle Jardinière secured Raphael's legacy as the supreme master of the Madonna genre. When it was acquired by King Francis I of France, now residing in the Louvre, it helped spread his fame across Europe. The work is hailed by art historians as the moment where Raphael finally perfected the balance between the thought of Leonardo and the execution of the classical ideal. It remains a definitive example of the High Renaissance, proving that Raphael had reached a pinnacle of technical achievement that subsequent generations would use as the ultimate standard to aspire to. This final Florentine masterpiece stands as a declaration of independence. Raphael no longer needed to mimic his rivals. He had learned to speak their language, the language of complex geometry and atmospheric depth, while maintaining the limpid clarity that was his own. By blending the thought of Leonardo with a warmth that felt attainable to the human soul, he created a standard of beauty that would dominate Western art for centuries. As he prepared to leave for Rome, La Belle Jardinière remained as a profound monument to his time in Florence, proving that the young master from Urbino had finally become the peer of the giants he once came to study. Completed between 1506 and 1507 and housed in the Pitti Palace of Florence, this portrait was commissioned as part of a pair, depicting a recently married merchant and his wife. Agnolo Doni married Maddalena Strozzi in 1503, though Raphael's portraits were probably executed in 1506, the period in which he studied Leonardo's Mona Lisa closely, as the figures are presented in a similar way to the picture plane, and their hands, like those of Leonardo's painting, are placed on top of one another. The low horizon of the landscape background permits a careful assessment of the human figure, providing a uniform light, defining surfaces and volumes. The relationship between landscape and figure presents a clear contrast to Leonardo's striking settings, suggesting a threatening presence of nature. The portraits present the merchant and his wife as wealthy and confident people with noble pretensions, as they calmly gaze out at the viewer. The compositions exude an overall sense of serenity that even the close attention to the materials of clothes and jewels is unable to attenuate. This aesthetic execution showcases Raphael's distinct artistic approach, one that prioritized clarity and social status over Leonardo's enigma. By choosing a low horizon and a clear, uniform light, Raphael removed the threatening presence of nature to focus entirely on the human face of power. The meticulous detail in the merchant's rings and the heavy fabric of his garments serves as a direct symbolic representation of his success and noble pretensions. Unlike the mysterious Mona Lisa, Agnolo Doni is presented with an inborn confidence, looking directly at the world he has mastered. This portrait proves that Raphael's personality as an artist was deeply empathetic to the needs of his patrons. He did not just paint a face, he painted a legacy. This work served as a vital bridge toward his mature period, proving he had the social intelligence and technical finesse to satisfy the most demanding elites in Florence before his ultimate journey to Rome. Housed in the Alte Pinakothek in Munich, this group depiction of the Holy Family was completed in 1508 and portrays Joseph, Mary, the Christ Child and Saint Elizabeth, with her son, the infant John the Baptist. The figures are structured in a formal pyramidal composition which is in contrast to the informal scene expressed by the glances. All the figures all share eye contact with one other person, as well as other interrelations developed between the individuals. The exacting observation of interpersonal behavior gives the painting its personal feel, in spite of its somewhat rigid and outward appearance. Raphael synthesizes elements drawn from Leonardo and Michelangelo, while adding a decisively northern landscape and delicate colorist passages dominated by iridescent tones. At the top of the canvas, groups of putti can be seen in two banks of clouds, and they also share their own glances, while none of the cherubim figures glance downwards at the Holy Family. The putti were in fact overpainted in the late 18th century but later restored in 1983. The current name of the artwork derives from the Florentine family that originally owned it before it passed into the Medici collection and then into Germany with the marriage of Anna Maria Lodovica de' Medici to the Palatine Elector. This aesthetic execution represents the absolute peak of Raphael's Florentine synthesis, where he matured from a brilliant apprentice into a master of complex narrative choreography. By arranging 5 figures into a rigorous pyramidal structure, he moved beyond the simpler trios of his earlier Madonnas, showcasing an artistic approach that could manage multiple psychological layers simultaneously. The human face of power. In this work is found in the exacting observation of interpersonal behavior. Raphael creates a web of glances that humanizes the divine figures, making the Holy Family feel like a tangible living unit. His personality as an artist shines through his ability to balance the monumental weight of Michelangelo with the atmospheric grace of Leonardo, all while maintaining his own signature clarity. This masterpiece acted as his final diploma in Florence, proving he possessed the technical and social intelligence required to handle the grand-scale decorative projects that awaited him at the papal court in Rome. It was in Florence that Fra Bartolomeo persuaded Raphael to give up the delicate, graceful style of Perugino in favor of a more grandiose style. His main artistic influence became Leonardo da Vinci, in particular his composition, use of gesture to create dialogue, his innovative techniques of chiaroscuro and sfumato. Using this inspiration, Raphael began to formulate his own style, which was quickly garnering awe and reverence for its ease of composition, clarity of form, and visual achievement. All stunning contributions to the Neoplatonic ideals of human grandeur and the Renaissance motivations toward depicting beauty. During this time, Raphael painted a number of Madonnas, which embodied much of Leonardo's experimentation with realism and composition, the most famous example of which was his painting La Belle Jardinière in 1507. Later that year, his The Entombment would show references to Michelangelo's Battle of Cassina of 1504. It was this ability to learn from other artists and develop the knowledge into a signature style of his own that is said to have infuriated Michelangelo, leading the tempestuous artist to accuse Raphael of plagiarism. Signed and dated Raphael Urbinas MDVE 1507, this painting is housed in the Galleria Borghese in Rome and forms the central panel of a larger altarpiece commissioned by Atalanta Baglioni of Perugia in honor of her slain son, Griffonetto Baglioni. The Baglioni family were the lords of Perugia and surrounding areas, and were also the leading condottiere or leaders of mercenary troops. There was an especially bloody episode in Perugia on the night of July 3, 1500, when Griffonetto Baglioni and several embittered members of the family conspired to murder much of the rest of the Baglioni family as they slept. According to Matarazzo, the chronicler of the family, following the bloodshed, Griffonetto's mother, Atalanta Baglioni, refused to give her son refuge in her home, and when he returned to the city, he was confronted by Gianpaolo Baglioni, the head of the family, who had survived the night by escaping over the rooftops. Atalanta changed her mind and rushed after her son, but arrived only in time to see him being killed by Gianpaolo and his men. Several years later, Atalanta commissioned Raphael to paint an altarpiece to commemorate Griffonetto in the family chapel in San Francesco al Prato. The artist spent 2 years working on the commission, developing his design through 2 phases and numerous preparatory drawings. It was to be the last of several major commissions by Raphael for Perugia, the home city of his master Perugino. He had already painted for the same church the Oddi altarpiece, now in the Vatican, for the Baglioni's great rival family and several other large works. The new commission marked an important stage in his development as an artist and the formation of his mature style. The panel remained in its location until in 1608 it was forcibly removed by a gang working for Cardinal Scipione Borghese, nephew of Pope Paul V. In order to pacify the city of Perugia, the Pope commissioned 2 copies of the painting from Giovanni Lanfranco and the Cavalier d'Arpino, and the copy by Arpino still resides in Perugia. Though confiscated by the French in 1797 and exhibited in Paris in the Louvre, then renamed the Napoleon Museum, it was returned to the Galleria Borghese in 1815, except for the predella which was taken to the Vatican museums. The scene depicted is in fact neither the formal understanding of the deposition, the removal of Christ from the cross, nor the entombment, but placed somewhere between both events. On the right is Mount Calvary, the location of the crucifixion and deposition, and on the left is the cave where the entombment will take place. 2 men, lacking halos, use a piece of linen to carry the dead Christ, and it seems as if all the participants in the carrying of the body are in suspended animation. The 2 carriers and Christ form strong diagonals in the shape of a V. The younger man on the right holding Christ is believed to be a representation of Atalanta's son, Griffonetto. Besides the two bearers, St. John and Nicodemus stand behind and to the left, while Mary Magdalene holds the hand of Christ. The posture of the legs of Nicodemus appear awkwardly and may hint at the work of apprentices in Raphael's studio. On the far right, in the other figural group slightly behind the main group, are the three Marys supporting the Virgin Mary, who has fainted due to her grief. Unlike the color tones used during his Florentine years, Raphael balances his use of strong reds, blues, yellows, and greens, creating a subtle contrast in his flesh tones, as demonstrated by Mary Magdalene's hand holding the dead Christ's hand. Christ's mother is presented with extreme torsion and sharply cut drapery, known as a figura serpentinata. Though seen in other famous works, her positioning seems to have been directly inspired by the example of Michelangelo's Doni Tondo, completed only a few years earlier. This aesthetic execution marks the definitive moment where Raphael's divine spark collided with the raw, muscular power of Michelangelo. By adopting the figura serpentinata and a more vibrant, balanced palette, Raphael moved beyond the gentle grace of his youth to embrace a high-stakes narrative of tragedy and physical strain, the human face of power. In this work is deeply intertwined with the bloody history of the Baglioni family. By immortalizing the slain Griffonetto as the youthful bearer of Christ, Raphael transformed a brutal family vendetta into a universal scene of mourning and redemption. This artistic approach, using numerous preparatory drawings to solve the complex dynamics of the V-shaped composition, reveals his relentless pursuit of perfection. This was the work that proved he was no longer just a student of the masters, but a formidable rival capable of synthesizing Michelangelo's strength with his own innate sense of harmony. It was this mature style that ultimately served as his final audition for Rome, signaling his readiness to decorate the grand halls of the Vatican for Pope Julius II. Depicting Saint Catherine of Alexandria, leaning on the wheel of her martyrdom, this 1507 canvas is now housed in London's National Gallery. It was painted towards the end of Raphael's Florentine period and is considered to be a work of the artist's transitional phase. The representation of religious passion is reminiscent of Pietro Perugino's female figures, though the graceful contrapposto of Catherine's pose is typical of the influence of Leonardo's style. Contrapposto, or counterpose, is an artistic term used in the visual arts to describe a person standing with most of their weight on one foot, with shoulders and arms twisting off-axis from the hips and legs, giving the figure a more dynamic or alternatively relaxed appearance. Raphael's Saint Catherine is believed to be an echo of Leonardo's lost painting Leda and the Swan, which now survives in several copies by other Renaissance artists. The saint's left arm leans on the wheel. The spikes have been reduced to rounded shapes in order to tone down the element of cruelty, and her right hand is pressed to her breast while she gazes up at a sky flooded with light. The composition is as rich in harmonious movement as the coloration is full and varied. The landscape is painted with particular care. Its light shading indicates the influence of Leonardo, though the jagged mountains that often characterize Leonardo's landscapes are absent. The delicate modeling of the saint and the slight torsion of her body as she leans on the wheel fully express the balanced character of Raphael's art. The panel clearly shows the intense formal research that underlies the painting. This aesthetic execution demonstrates Raphael's growing artistic approach to the divine in human form, where technical mastery serves spiritual ecstasy. By employing a sophisticated contrapposto, Raphael avoids the static rigidity of earlier eras, instead imbuing St. Catherine with a sense of rhythmic, living energy. The human face of power here is subtle but profound. By softening the cruel spikes of the wheel, Raphael shifts the focus from the agony of martyrdom to the nobility of faith. His personality as an artist, ever the harmonizer, shines through as he blends the emotional intensity of Perugino with the structural dynamism of Leonardo. This work represents a crucial bridge in his career. The formal research seen in the saint's torsion would soon evolve into the monumental figures of the Vatican's Stanza della Segnatura. It is the final, serene breath of his Florentine journey, before he was summoned to Rome to transform the papacy's vision of heaven on earth. This fresco in the Stanza della Segnatura, one of the 4 Raphael rooms in the Apostolic Palace in the Vatican, is one of 4 paintings in the room which depict separately philosophy, poetry, theology, and law. The Disputation of the Holy Sacrament represents theology and shows the occupants of a Catholic church underneath the span of heaven above their sacred altar. The fresco represents Christianity's victory over philosophy, which is depicted in the School of Athens, the fresco on the opposite wall. In heaven, we see Christ in the center with the Virgin Mary on his right and John the Baptist on his left. God the Father is shown reigning over heaven above Jesus, with Adam to his left and Jacob to his right. Moses is seen holding the tablets with the 10 Commandments, and the Holy Spirit is shown at the feet of Jesus. On either side of the Holy Spirit are the 4 Gospels held by cherubs. On earth are theologians, the original 4 doctors of the Church, a title given to St. Augustine, Pope Gregory I, St. Jerome, and St. Ambrose, named in their halos, are seen debating the transubstantiation, the miraculous conversion of the Eucharistic elements at their consecration into the body and blood of Christ in the earthly form of bread and wine. St. Augustine and St. Ambrose are seated to the right of the altar, and Pope Gregory I and St. Jerome to the left. Also present are Pope Julius II, Pope Sixtus IV, Savonarola, and Dante. Altogether, this fresco depicts over 100 figures. In Raphael's rendition, the Disputation takes on more than a depiction of the Eucharist. Instead, it becomes a dynamic search by theologians for the truth embodied in the mystery of the Eucharist. This fresco, painted when Raphael was only 27 years old, represents his first significant commission to redecorate what were to become Pope Julius II's private apartments. Unfortunately, it involved painting over frescoes by other important Renaissance painters, including Piero della Francesca and Raphael's teacher Perugino. The Stanza della Segnatura was used by Julius II as a library and private office, and takes its name from its use later in the 16th century as the highest court of the Holy See, presided over by the Pontiff Segnatura Gratiae et Illustitiae. Raphael won the commission to paint the four rooms in direct competition with both Michelangelo, who was at the time working on the Sistine Chapel, and Leonardo da Vinci. This is said to have incensed Michelangelo, who would later accuse Raphael of plagiarism, spreading rumors that Raphael had stolen into the Sistine Chapel to have a sneak preview of Michelangelo's work. The source of the animosity was, however, probably no more than that of competition between two extremely talented professionals vying for the favor of the same client. This aesthetic execution marks Raphael's ascension into the absolute human face of power. By organizing over 100 figures into a seamless hierarchy that bridges heaven and earth, he demonstrated an artistic approach capable of making complex theological dogma visually breathtaking and accessible. His personality, charismatic, adaptable, and socially brilliant, allowed him to navigate the treacherous waters of the papal court, winning the favor of Pope Julius II over even the formidable Michelangelo. While the animosity between them fueled legends of rivalry, it was Raphael's unique ability to synthesize the grand style with a sense of divine order that defined the High Renaissance in Rome. This fresco was not just a painting of theology. It was Raphael's personal declaration of victory, proving that at just 27, he had the intellectual and technical authority to replace the old masters and define the visual identity of the Catholic Church for centuries to come. One of the most celebrated frescoes of the Italian Renaissance, the School of Athens, was painted between 1509 and 1511 as a part of Raphael's commission to decorate the rooms now known as the Stanze di Raffaello in the Vatican's Apostolic Palace. The Stanza della Segnatura was the first of the rooms to be decorated, and Raphael chose to represent philosophy with a depiction of Plato's famous Academy. The School of Athens is one of a group of 4 main frescoes on the walls of the stanza, each depicting one distinct branch of knowledge. The fresco was probably the second painting to be finished there, after La Disputa, theology, on the opposite wall, and before the Parnassus, literature. The School of Athens has long been regarded by many as Raphael's masterpiece, and the perfect embodiment of the classical spirit of the High Renaissance. In the fresco, he portrays many famous Greek philosophers, with Plato and Aristotle at the center, but as he made few designations outside possible likenesses, with no contemporary documents explaining the painting, the identification of philosophers is problematic. Plato is depicted on the left and Aristotle, his student, on the right. Both figures hold modern-bound copies of their books in their left hands, while gesturing with their right. Plato holds his Timaeus, Aristotle his Nicomachean Ethics. Plato is depicted as old, grey and barefoot, bearing the features of the artist Leonardo. Aristotle stands slightly ahead of him and is younger and handsome, dressed with gold and wearing shoes, while the youth about them seem to look his way. In addition, the two central figures gesture along different dimensions. Plato vertically, upward along the picture plane, into the beautiful vault above. Aristotle on the horizontal plane at right angles to the picture plane, hence in strong foreshortening, initiating a powerful flow of space toward the viewers. Their gestures indicate the central aspects of their philosophies, for Plato his theory of forms, and for Aristotle his empiricist views, with an emphasis on concrete particulars. The building is represented in the shape of a Greek cross, which art historians believe was intended to express harmony between pagan philosophy and Christian theology. The architecture was inspired by the work of Bramante, who, according to Vasari, helped Raphael with the fresco. There are two sculptures in the background, one on the left of Apollo, the god of light, archery and music, holding a lyre, while the sculpture on the right is Athena, goddess of wisdom, in her Roman guise as Minerva. The main arch, above the characters, reveals a meander, also known as a Greek fret or Greek key design. A design using continuous lines that repeat in a series of rectangular bends, which originated on pottery of the Greek geometric period, and then become widely used in ancient Greek architectural friezes. This aesthetic execution is more than a tribute to antiquity. It is the ultimate manifesto of the human face of power. Raphael's artistic approach was brilliantly strategic. By giving Plato the face of Leonardo da Vinci and casting Bramante as Euclid, he elevated his contemporaries to the status of immortal giants. Most famously, in a later addition to the fresco, he depicted Michelangelo as the brooding Heraclitus, seated in the foreground. This gesture reflects Raphael's incredible personality. Even in the heat of fierce competition, he possessed the grace to acknowledge his rival's genius, integrating Michelangelo's rugged strength into his own harmonious universe. The divine spark in this work lies in the perfect vanishing point, which draws the eye past the intellectual giants of the past toward the limitless potential of the human mind. The school of Athens secured Raphael's legacy as the Prince of Painters, proving that art could not only depict beauty, but also organize the entire history of human thought into a single, breathtaking moment of clarity. The fresco of the Parnassus in the Stanza di Raffaello in the Vatican was painted in circa 1510 at the commission of Pope Julius II, and was probably the third completed wall of the Stanza della Segnatura to be painted in 1511, after La Disputa and the School of Athens, occupying the other walls of the room. The Parnassus represents poetry, presenting the mythological Mount Parnassus, where, according to legend, Apollo dwells, placed in the center of the fresco, playing a contemporary violin rather than a classical lyre, surrounded by the 9 muses, 9 poets from antiquity and 9 contemporary poets. For depicting the face of Homer in a dark blue robe to the left of center, Raphael used the face of Laocoon, which had only been recently excavated in 1506 from the celebrated sculpture Laocoon and his sons, using the expression of the main figure's intense pain to represent the classical poet's blindness. Several female figures in the fresco have been said to be inspired by Michelangelo's creation of Adam and other Sistine ceiling paintings, with muscular body frames that are unusual for Raphael's oeuvre. Sappho is the only female poet portrayed in the scene, presumably named so that she is not confused with a muse. Interestingly, she is a late addition that does not appear in the print by Marcantonio Raimondi that records a drawing for the fresco. This aesthetic execution reveals Raphael's unique artistic approach to historical synthesis. By replacing Apollo's lyre with a contemporary violin, he bridged the gap between the ancient world and the Renaissance court. The human face of power is subtly displayed through his choice to use the recently unearthed Laocoon as a model for Homer, showcasing how the papacy's archaeological discoveries directly fueled the era's creative, divine spark. Raphael's personality as an artistic diplomat shines here as he incorporates Michelangelo's muscularity into his own graceful style, proving he could master the strength of his rival while maintaining a lyrical harmony. This fresco completes the intellectual universe of the room, solidifying Raphael's legacy as the master who could unify music, poetry, and theology into a single, cohesive vision of human grandeur. This beautiful painting was commissioned by Paolo Giovio, Raphael's first biographer, who planned to send it to the church of the Olivetani in Nocera dei Pagani, and the piece was completed by 1510. In the 18th century, the painting belonged to the Spanish house of Alba, whose name it bears. In 1836, it was acquired by Nicholas Afar of Russia, who made the painting one of the highlights of the Imperial Hermitage Museum in St. Petersburg. A century later, the Soviet government clandestinely sold it to Andrew W. Mellon, who donated his collection to the National Gallery of Art in Washington, D.C., and where it resides today. The Alba Madonna depicts the Madonna, Christ and John the Baptist, in a typical Italian countryside. Mary is dressed in an antique costume of turban, sandals, and flowing robes. The serene, bucolic atmosphere of Raphael's Tondo belies its emotional meaning. John the Baptist holds up a cross to Christ, which the infant grasps, while all three figures stare at the symbol of the Passion. The older boy looks at Jesus full of understanding, visibly saddened, while the Virgin places her hand on his shoulder, as if to comfort him. During its time in the Hermitage, the painting would be transferred from a circular panel to a square canvas. Through analysis of the painting, it was determined that the original panel was severely split down the center and on the right side. The canvas pattern is visible on the surface, and the landscape on the far right was damaged in the transferring process. During World War II, a group of over 100 pieces of art belonging to the National Gallery of Art, including the Alba Madonna, were transported by train to Asheville, NC, where they would be stored in the unfinished music room of Biltmore House. Transported with the utmost secrecy, heavy steel doors were installed and bars were put in the windows of the barren music room. In 1944, after it became clear that the war would soon be over, the paintings were returned to the National Gallery of Art. This aesthetic execution represents a pinnacle of the Tondo, circular form, where Raphael achieved a seamless flow of movement that echoes his recent work in the Vatican. The artistic approach here is profoundly influenced by his mature period in Rome. The figures no longer just fit into a triangle but move with a fluid, monumental grace that occupies the circular space perfectly. The human face of power in this work is reflected in its extraordinary journey through history, from the hands of Spanish dukes and Russian czars to its secret protection during World War II, proving that Raphael's art became a universal treasure worth the highest level of state security. His personality as an artist shines through the bucolic serenity he creates, hiding the profound sorrow of the Passion behind a mask of classical beauty. This painting solidifies his legacy not just as a painter of the Church, but as a master of human emotion whose divine spark could turn a simple wooden panel into a symbol of cultural endurance across centuries and continents. Based on a recommendation by Donato Bramante, the first architect to rebuild St. Peter's Basilica in Rome, Pope Julius II invited Raphael to Rome. It would become his adopted home for the next 12 years. There he worked for both Pope Julius II and his successor, Pope Leo VI, the son of Lorenzo de' Medici, and it was during this time that he gained the epithet Prince of Painters. Completed between 1511 and 1512, this striking portrait of Pope Julius II would have a lasting influence on subsequent papal portraiture. The canvas was specially hung at the pillars of the Church of Santa Maria del Popolo, on the main route from the north into Rome, on feast and high holy days. Giorgio Vasari, writing long after Julius's death, said that it was so lifelike and true it frightened everyone who saw it, as if it were the living man himself. The portrait now exists in several versions and copies, and for many years a version of the painting, now housed in Florence's Uffizi Gallery, was believed to be the original version, though in much more recent times opinion shifted, and it is now generally agreed that London's National Gallery version is the original portrait. Previous papal portraits tended to present their subject frontally or kneeling in profile. But Raphael had chosen to represent Julius II in a particular humor, seemingly lost in thought. The intimacy of the image was unprecedented at the time, though it was to become the model followed by many future painters, including Sebastiano del Piombo and Diego Velázquez. The painting established a type for papal portraits that endured for over 2 centuries. Until 1970, it was commonly believed that the London version was a studio copy of the original. But in 1969, Konrad Oberhuber of the National Gallery of Art in Washington asked the National Gallery to take X-ray photographs of their version. These revealed that the background of the painting behind the chair had been entirely repainted, concealing an inventory number from the Borghese collection and the green textile hanging now visible after the overpaint was removed in 1970. Small paint samples separated during this cleaning showed that there had been an even earlier hanging with a colored pattern. The National Gallery's Cecil Gould published the results of the research in 1970, asserting that Raphael's original had been rediscovered and the attribution is now generally accepted. This aesthetic execution stands as the definitive human face of power. Raphael's revolutionary artistic approach was to strip away the rigid frontal mask of the papacy to reveal the vulnerable, aging man beneath the red velvet. By depicting Julius II in a state of intimate melancholy and weary contemplation, Raphael did not diminish the Pope's authority. Instead, he made it more formidable by rooting it in human experience. His personality as a master of social psychology allowed him to capture the terribilità, the terrifying willpower of his patron through subtle details. The tight grip on the chair's arms and the downcast, heavy gaze. This divine spark in portraiture created a psychological realism that frightened viewers with its lifelike presence, ensuring Raphael's legacy as the man who set the standard for how the world would view the leaders of the Church for the next 200 years. Raphael also received his first architectural commission from Agostino Chigi, which was the design of the Chigi Chapel in the church of Santa Maria del Popolo in 1513. He also went on to work with Bramante on the architectural design of the church of Sant Eligio degli Orefici in Rome. It was these architectural projects which secured him the position of architectural commissioner of the new St. Peter's Basilica following Bramante's death in 1514. Translated as The Woman with the Veil, La Donna Velata is now one of the most celebrated portraits of the Renaissance period. The sitter of the painting also appears in Raphael's La Fornarina and is traditionally identified as the Baccaress, Fornarina, Margherita Luti, Raphael's Roman mistress. The portrait exhibits greater attention to color and rendering of skin and clothes compared to previous female portraits by the artist. The regular oval of the woman's face contrasts strikingly against the dark background, and her eyes maintain a penetrating expression. The silk of her sleeves contrasts with her ivory-like skin and is closely associated with the thin pleating of the dress, held up by a corset with golden embroidery. As in the portrait of Castiglione, the figure radiates a sense of great dignity and restraint. Though greys and light blues largely dominate the previous portrait of the courtier, the warm tonalities of white and gold in La Donna Velata are of greater prominence. Housed in the Louvre, this 1515 oil painting is widely regarded to be one of the great portraits of the Renaissance, having an enduring influence on artists throughout the ensuing centuries. The portrait depicts Raphael's friend, the diplomat and humanist Baldassare Castiglione, whose ascent in courtly circles paralleled that of the artist. They were close friends by 1504 when Castiglione made his second visit to Urbino, when the artist was gaining recognition in the humanist circle of the city's ducal court. Raphael was commissioned by Guidobaldo da Montefeltro in 1505 to paint a picture for Henry VII, and Castiglione traveled to England to present the finished painting to the king. It is possible that Castiglione later served as a scholarly advisor for the school of Athens, and that the depiction of Zoroaster in that fresco may be a portrait of the courtier. Originally painted on a wooden panel, the portrait's composition is pyramidal, drawing the viewer's eye up to center of the sitter's face. Copies produced in the 17th century show Castiglione's hands in full, suggesting that the picture was subsequently cut by several inches at the bottom. Castiglione is seated against an earth-toned background, wearing a dark doublet with a trim of squirrel fur and black ribbon, while on his head is a turban topped by a notched beret. His clothing attire indicates that this was painted during the winter, when Castiglione was in Rome by appointment of Guidobaldo da Montefeltro to Pope Leo X. The lightest areas are the subject's face, seen nearly head-on. Castiglione is portrayed with a somewhat helpless expression, intimating a humane sensitivity characteristic of Raphael's later portraits. The soft contours of his clothing and rounded beard express the subtlety of the subject's personality. In his The Book of the Courtier, Castiglione is renowned for discussing the merits of the cultivation of fine manners and dress. He popularized the term sprezzatura, nonchalant mastery, an ideal of effortless grace befitting a man of culture. The concept eventually found its way in English literature in the plays of Ben Jonson and William Shakespeare. This aesthetic execution is the visual personification of sprezzatura, the effortless grace that defined the high Renaissance ideal. Raphael's artistic approach moved away from the ostentatious display of wealth seen in his earlier portraits. opting instead for a sophisticated palette of grays, blacks, and earth tones to highlight the humane sensitivity of his friend. The human face of power here is not found in crowns or scepters, but in the quiet intellectual authority of the courtier who shaped the manners of Europe. Raphael's personality as a social chameleon is perfectly reflected in this work. He didn't just paint a diplomat. He painted the very essence of the humanist circle they both inhabited. This divine spark of psychological depth and tonal harmony would later mesmerize masters like Rembrandt, Titian, and Velázquez, securing the painting's legacy as the ultimate template for the modern gentleman. It proves that Raphael's true genius lay in his ability to capture not just the likeness of a man, but the soul of an entire era. One of the most well-known of Raphael's paintings, which was not commissioned, La Fornarina, is a sister portrait to La Donna Velata and depicts Margherita Luti, the artist's great love. The painting shows a seated half-length nude looking out at the viewer in an undone dress, concealing the lower part of her body. While her left hand rests on her lap, her right hand touches her breast. A veil, while a symbol of modesty, fails to conceal her sensuously presented upper torso. The dark landscape in the background enhances the tonal modeling quality of the painting and richness of the turban she wears. With her flawless skin and radiant face, she looks straight past us, smiling to someone on our right. And knowing her relationship with Raphael, we have no hesitation in imagining her looking at her lover as he painted her. Raphael signed this painting on the band on her arm, perhaps alluding to his possession of her. After a recent restoration, it appears the girl was originally wearing a wedding ring. Because the wedding ring was painted out, speculation rose that Raphael had secretly married Margherita. But due to their different social classes, and the fact that he was already engaged to Maria Bibbiena, the pair had to enjoy their union in private. The work shows Leonardo's influence on Raphael, seen in the way gesture is used to convey meaning. It is also representative of the artist's mission to depict only the highest ideals of beauty. As Gustave Flaubert noted in his Dictionary of Received Ideas, 1911, Fornarina, she was a beautiful woman, of which there is little doubt. Many artists have been inspired by the love story, including Giuseppe Sogni, Henri-Joseph Martelet, Nicaise de Keyser, Francesco Gandolfi, and Francesco Valaperta, all of whom titled their paintings Raphael and La Fornarina. The most famous artist who drew upon this work was Jean-Auguste Dominique Ingres with his La Fornarina, 1814. In it, Margherita is resting on Raphael's knee, with Raphael looking adoringly at his own painting of La Fornarina. Picasso, too, was entranced by Raphael's secret passion, and in 1968 created his famous 357 series of 25 erotic etchings. More recently, Cindy Sherman modeled herself as La Fornarina in her work Untitled No. 205, 1989. 1514 was also the year Raphael became engaged to Maria Bibbiena, Cardinal Bernardo Dovizi Bibbiena's niece. The cardinal was a lifelong friend and patron and held a position of considerable power at the Medici court. He was protected by Pope Julius II during his papacy, as well as being a longtime friend of Giovanni de' Medici, who later became Pope Leo XII. Raphael is said to have accepted the engagement under duress, as he was already smitten by a baker's daughter, Margherita Luti, who was his mistress and model. Largely written out of Raphael's biography because of the general interest in his infatuation with Margherita Luti, it is known that Maria Bibbiena died of an unknown illness in 1520 before the marriage could take place. Margherita Luti, immortalized in Raphael's portrait La Fornarina, 1518-19, was the great love of his life. So much so that Vasari notes when Raphael was commissioned to decorate the Villa Farnesina for Agostino Chigi, his heart was not in his work due to his preoccupation with her. Chigi had to arrange for the two lovers to meet in secret throughout the commission. The themes of love and marriage chosen by Raphael for the villa has led to speculation that the two might have been secretly married. In 1517, Pope Leo X appointed Raphael Commissioner of Antiquities in Rome, a role of overseeing the restoration of antiquities. Raphael set about fulfilling this responsibility by drawing up an archaeological map of Rome. His restoration methods differed from the approach of earlier restorers by his insistence on keeping pieces true to their original form, rather than the creative reconstructions favored by other architects of the time. The Pope also commissioned Raphael to design 10 tapestries to hang on the walls of the Sistine Chapel. Raphael managed to complete 7 cartoons, full-sized preparatory drawings, which were sent to be woven in the workshop of Flemish weaver Peter Koker van Alst. They were hung in the chapel shortly before Raphael's death. One of Raphael's most important papal commissions resulted in a series of 10 cartoons, now housed in London's Victoria and Albert Museum, of which 7 survive, for tapestries depicting scenes of the lives of St. Paul and St. Peter for the Sistine Chapel. The cartoons were sent to Brussels to be woven in the workshop of Pier van Aelst. Now, on special occasions, the surviving tapestries are hung below Michelangelo's famous ceiling in the chapel. Reproduced in the form of prints, they rivaled Michelangelo's ceiling as some of the most influential designs of the Renaissance. Admiration of them reached its highest pitch in the 18th and 19th centuries, when they were described as the Parthenon sculptures of modern art. The tapestries are mirror images of the cartoons, as they were worked from behind. Raphael's awareness of this in his designs appears to be intermittent. The artist's workshop would have assisted in their completion, and they were finished with great care and actually demonstrate a much more subtle range of coloring than was capable of being reproduced in a tapestry. Raphael knew that the final product of his work would be produced by craftsmen rendering his design in another medium. His efforts are therefore entirely concentrated on strong compositions and broad effects, rather than felicitous handling or detail. It was partly this that made the design so effective in reduced print versions. The Raphael cartoons represent scenes from the lives of Saints Peter and Paul, emphasizing a number of points relevant to contemporary controversies in the period just before the Protestant Reformation, especially the entrusting of the Church to Saint Peter, the founder of the papacy. There were relatively few precedents for these subjects, so Raphael was less constrained by traditional iconographic expectations than he would have been with a series on the life of Christ or Mary. The scenes from the life of Peter were designed to hang below the frescoes of the life of Christ by Perugino and others in the middle register of the chapel. Opposite them, the life of St. Paul was to hang below the life of Moses in fresco. An intervening small frieze showed subjects from the life of Leo, also designed to complement the other series. Each sequence begins at the altar wall, with the life of Peter on the right side of the chapel and life of Paul on the left. The cartoons were bought from a Genoese collection in 1623 by King Charles I of England, then still Prince of Wales, using agents. He only paid $300 for the cartoons, suggesting that they were regarded as working designs rather than works of art in their own right. The king had in fact intended to make further tapestries from them at Mortlake, which he did with new borders, paying $500 for each, though he was well aware of their artistic significance. They had been cut into long vertical strips a yard wide, as was required for use on low-warp tapestry looms, and were only permanently rejoined in the 1690s at Hampton Court. In Charles I's day, these were stored in wooden boxes in the banqueting house, Whitehall, and they were one of the few items in the royal collection withheld from sale by Oliver Cromwell after Charles's execution. The fate of the other 3 cartoons from the set is unknown. This aesthetic execution demonstrates Raphael's incredible versatility. Knowing these designs would be woven into tapestries, he shifted his artistic approach from delicate detailing to strong compositions and broad effects. He created monumental figures and dramatic gestures that could read clearly from a distance, anticipating the needs of the medium. The human face of power is immense here. These tapestries were designed to hang in the Sistine Chapel, directly competing with Michelangelo's ceiling, asserting Raphael's dominance even in his rival's territory. His personality, confident and ambitious, shines through as he tackles themes of the papacy's founding, Peter and Paul, to reinforce the authority of Pope Leo X just before the Protestant Reformation. These cartoons secured his legacy not just in painting but in decorative arts, influencing European design for centuries and proving that his divine spark could translate into any material, from canvas to wool. In his later years, Raphael lived in the Palazzo Caprini, a palace designed by Bramante. During this period, he was lauded with honors, including the prestigious title Groom of the Chamber, a high office at the papal court. He was also appointed as Knight of the Papal Order of the Golden Spur for his contribution to the glory of the Catholic Church. He also worked on a large number of architectural projects, which included the Palazzo di Jacopo da Brescia, a magnificent palace for Pope Leo's doctor, and on the Villa Madama, a country retreat for Cardinal Giulio de' Medici, who later became Pope Clement VII, which remained unfinished at his death. The last painting he was working on at the time of his death was the Transfiguration, 1520. Also commissioned by Cardinal Giulio de' Medici, which was intended to be for a large altarpiece for Narbonne Cathedral in France. By the time he died, Raphael is said to have had a workshop of over 50 apprentices, which was larger than any other painter at the time. Raphael's last painting was commissioned by Cardinal Giulio de' Medici, who was destined to become Pope Clement VII. The Transfiguration was conceived as an altarpiece for the Narbonne Cathedral in France, and the artist worked upon it until his early death in 1520. Unusually for a depiction of the Transfiguration of Jesus in Christian art, the subject is combined with an additional episode from the Gospels in the lower part of the painting. Originally, Michelangelo was commissioned to paint the raising of Lazarus to accompany the Transfiguration, at a time when both artists were locked in fierce competition. Yet eventually the commission went to Michelangelo's friend Sebastiano del Piombo, and the paintings would become emblematic of two very different approaches to painting. By the time Sebastiano del Piombo's work was officially inspected in the Vatican by Leo the King on 11th December 1519, the Transfiguration was still unfinished. Raphael would have been familiar with the final form of the raising of Lazarus as early as the autumn of 1518, and there is considerable evidence that he worked feverishly to complete his painting, adding a second theme and 19 figures. A surviving modello for the project, now in the Louvre, shows the dramatic change in the intended work. Examination of the final Transfiguration revealed more than 16 incomplete areas and alterations. Raphael is said to have preferred a fast lifestyle with many lovers, and he died on the 6th of April 1520, following a night of excessive debauchery, aged only 37. A week after his death, the two paintings were exhibited together in the Vatican. While there is some speculation that Raphael's pupil, Giulio Romano, and assistant, Gianfrancesco Penny, painted some of the background figures in the lower right half of the painting, there is no evidence that anyone but Raphael finished the majority of the painting. The cleaning of the painting from 1972 to 1976 confirmed that the assistants finished only some of the lower left figures, while the rest of the painting is by Raphael himself. The painting depicts two consecutive but distinct biblical narratives from the Gospel of Matthew, also related in the Gospel of Mark. In the first, the Transfiguration of Christ itself, Moses and Elijah appear before the transfigured Christ with Peter, James, and John looking on. In the second, the apostles fail to cure a boy from demons and await the return of Christ. The upper section of the painting represents the Transfiguration itself on Mount Tabor according to tradition, with the transfigured Christ levitating in front of illuminated clouds between the prophets Moses and Elijah, with whom Jesus is conversing. The two figures kneeling on the left are commonly identified as Justus and Pastor, who shared August 6th as a feast day with the Feast of the Transfiguration. These saints were the patrons of Medici's archbishopric and the cathedral for which the painting was intended. It has also been suggested that the figures might represent the martyrs Saint Felicissimus and Saint Agapitus, who are commemorated in the Missal on the Feast of the Transfiguration. In 1797, during Napoleon's Italian campaign, the Transfiguration was taken to Paris by French troops and installed in the Louvre. Previously, in 1794, Napoleon's Committee of Public Instruction had suggested an expert committee accompany the armies to remove important works of art and science to be transported to Paris. The Louvre, which had been opened to the public in 1793, was a clear destination for the art. Among the most sought-after treasures Napoleon's agents coveted were the works of Raphael. Jean-Baptiste Wicquart, a member of Napoleon's selection committee, was a collector of Raphael's drawings. Baron Antoine Jean Gros, another member, had been greatly influenced by Raphael art throughout his life. For artists like Jacques-Louis David and his pupils Girodet and Ingres, Raphael represented the embodiment of French artistic ideals. Therefore, Napoleon's committee seized every available artwork by Raphael. To Napoleon, Raphael was simply the greatest of Italian artists and the Transfiguration his greatest work. The painting, along with the Apollo Belvedere, the Laocoon, the Capitoline Brutus and many others, received a triumphal entry into Paris on 27th July 1798, the 4th anniversary of Maximilien de Robespierre's fall. In November 1798, the Transfiguration was put on public display in the Grand Salon at the Louvre. As of 4th July 1801, it became the centerpiece of a large Raphael exhibition in the Grande Galerie. More than 20 artworks by Raphael were placed on display. After the fall of Napoleon Bonaparte in 1815, envoys to Pope Pius VII, Antonio Canova and Marino Marini managed to secure the Transfiguration, along with 66 other pictures, as part of the Treaty of Paris. By agreement with the Congress of Vienna, the works were to be exhibited to the public. The original gallery was in the Borgia apartment in the Apostolic Palace. After several moves within the Vatican, the painting now resides in the Pinacoteca Vaticana. This aesthetic execution serves as Raphael's last testament, a visual summation of his entire life's work. The painting is a masterpiece of contrast. The upper half radiates with the serene, cool colors of the divine, while the lower half is plunged into the chaotic, warm tones of human suffering, chiaroscuro. His artistic approach creates a dynamic tension that prefigures the Baroque era, moving beyond the static harmony of the Renaissance. The human face of power is revealed in the sheer ambition of the composition. Even on his deathbed, Raphael was competing to prove his supremacy over Sebastiano del Piombo and Michelangelo. The symbolism is profound. The failure of the apostles below highlights that without the divine presence above, humanity is helpless. This work encapsulates his legacy as the mortal God. It is the final proof that he had successfully bridged the gap between heaven and earth, leaving the world a vision of transfigured beauty that no other artist could ever replicate. Raphael died in Rome on Good Friday, April 6, 1520, when he was only 37 years old. He died after a short illness during which he was able to put his affairs in order and receive his last rites, the last prayers given to Catholics before death. In keeping with local custom, his body lay in state at his home, which was followed by one of the largest funeral processions of his time, ending at the Vatican where his funeral mass was held. As noted by the French biographer Quatremer de Quincy in his History of Raphael of 1824, the true grandeur of the procession was that immense concourse of friends, of pupils, of artists, of renowned writers, of personages of every rank who accompanied him amidst the tears of the whole city. For the grief was general, and the Pope's court shared in it. In his will, Raphael asked to be buried in the Pantheon in Rome, next to Maria Bibbiena. His tomb bears the inscription written by Pietro Bembo, a scholar who later became a cardinal. Here lies that famous Raphael by whom nature feared to be conquered while he lived, and when he was dying, feared herself to die. Although it is known he left a large amount of money to his beloved Margherita Luti, not much is known of what became of her. There is, however, a record of a woman calling herself Margherita Luti, a widow, who entered the convent of Saint Apollonia a few months after his death. Much speculation surrounds Raphael's premature death, primarily due to Vasari's reference of his death being caused by the excesses of love. Vasari also wrote, "He was a very amorous person, delighting much in women, and ever ready to serve them." Although these reasons are firmly lodged in the public imagination, the cause of death of this consummate painter remains unconfirmed. In an April 7, 1520 letter from Pandolfo Pico to Isabella d'Este, a great patron of the arts, he prophesied Raphael's death as being that of a good man who has finished his first life, but his second life of fame will be eternal. Gentlemanly, well-mannered with an inborn confidence to move in courtly circles, the talent to imaginatively interpret both secular and religious commissions, and the consummate concentration and dedication to perfection have all contributed to Raphael's reputation as one who reached the pinnacle of what a master artist could be. As Vasari stated, possessors of such rare and numerous gifts as were seen in Raffaello da Urbino are not merely men, but mortal gods. Joshua Reynolds, first president of the Royal Academy in London, hoped students of the school would be inspired by the divine spark of Raphael's genius, directing them to copy the great artist's drawings as part of their studies. As art historian Neil Asherson commented, 19th century ideas of European civilization imagined art as an evolutionary process which would culminate in perfection. Raphael seemed to embody perfection. In direct opposition of this perfection, the famous art historian John Ruskin would champion a different approach in the 19th century, giving birth to the rejection of the Renaissance ideals of human grandeur and its importance as part of an artist's education. As Ruskin explained, execution was looked for rather than thought, and beauty rather than veracity. This rebellion moved the academic teaching of art away from the philosophies where Raphael was held to be the ideal, and led to the formation of the group of painters called the Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood in the 1840s. The founding members of the society, William Holman Hunt, John Everett Millais, and Dante Gabriel Rossetti, believed that the only way to find a new direction in art was to go back to medieval and early Renaissance art, which preceded the painterly techniques and artistic interpretation epitomized by Raphael and the art of the High Renaissance. Despite the direction modern art eventually took, Raphael continues to be revered for taking the practice of painting to the pinnacle of technical achievement, which subsequent generations would use as the ideal to aspire to. Those who have paid homage to this most extraordinary of artists in their own work are a legendary roster including Albrecht Dürer, Titian, Rembrandt, Velázquez, Sir Joshua Reynolds, and Pierre-Auguste Renoir. Raphael has remained consistently fixed in our imagination since the early 16th century. Despite the increasing historical distance that conspires to numb our understanding of the Renaissance world,